Okay, this is a turn of the 20th century politics review. We talked about the turn of the 20th century. There was a progressive movement, which is a third-party political movement that developed as a response to the excesses, the problems of the Gilded Age. The Gilded Age had problems with robber barons, income differences or disparities, working conditions, all caused by industrialization. It also emphasized the beneficial role that government could play in reforming the problems caused by industrialization. So it's really a reaction to laissez-faire from previous years. Now the government would be playing more of a hands-on role. With an emphasis on progress, many progressive reformers were middle, upper-class individuals who believed it was their religious duty to serve those less fortunate and believed that people or government could be a positive influence on society's development. There were three basic goals we talked about. One was returning government back to the people, getting rid of government controlled by the monopolist and giving it back to the people's representatives, getting rid of the people being controlled by local urban bosses, problem of industrialization. These rapid industrial cities were creating political corruption. So give government back to the people. Number two, guaranteeing economic opportunity through government regulation. There's two laws in particular that you're required to know. One is the Sherman Antitrust Act. That was the first antitrust act used to prevent any business structure that restrained trade, disrupted trade. This became a legal tool to bust up monopolistic arrangements like Standard Oil. Later, there's a second antitrust law, the Clayton Antitrust Act, that expanded the provisions of the Sherman Antitrust Act by including price fixing as against the law, and it exempted unions, which meant that unions that went on strike or associated workers together would not be under the definition of a restraint of trade, that these were only laws, these antitrust laws, that would bust up business monopolies and would not affect unions. It also geared towards eliminating social injustices. This was quite diverse. For example, the problem of child labor, dangerous working conditions, even the effect of alcohol and alcoholism on families. We see the 18th Amendment passed as a prohibition movement to prevent the sale and distribution of alcohol. Effects of industrialization, fairness in elections, lots of things can fall under social injustices of this third-party progressive movement. The key to exposing the problems to an American public were journalists. These were called muckrakers. They helped to expose the filth, the corruption of big businesses, and to make reform a more urgent public issue. A lot of these articles were published for people to read in popular magazines such as McClure's. We talked about Jacob Riis, who was a muckraker who exposed the problem of the inner city slums in How the Other Half Lives, of course the crowded, cramped conditions of the tenements. Lewis Hine, who was a photographer for the National Child Labor Committee, to expose the problem of child labor as a social injustice. Ida Tarbell, who wrote The History of Standard Oil, exposing the problem of Rockefeller as a robber baron. And then Ida Wells, she has a star next to her name because she's kind of unique amongst progressives because she's an African-American woman who took on the problem of racial violence in the South. She wanted to make the federal government more aware of lynching as a crime, particularly as it affected the South, but also other areas of the country. Generally, race and race relations was not a goal of the progressive movement, but as a reformer, she fits within the muckrakers. Upton Sinclair, who wrote the famous Jungle to expose the horrors of the meatpacking industry and the unsanitary conditions in the nation's meat facilities. In terms of progressive accomplishments at the local level and addressing the problem of corrupt political bosses, we have a new form of local government called the Commission. This is simply an appointed group of citizens who will run the city. When the city of Galveston, Texas was destroyed, the Commission, a concerned group of citizens, decided it would be best to use money to build a seawall to prevent that from happening. The Commission is also followed by a council manager system of local government to address the problem of partisanship, and urban abuses. In this case, you have the citizens elect a council, such as we have here in Salem, and then they hire a professional manager who is not necessarily linked to any campaign or any political affiliation. They're professionals who have a degree, more than likely in city management, and this helps to divorce us from the problems of urban corruption. In the area of state government, there's 3 terms to know. The term initiative is when people can take the initiative to propose a law, some change. A referendum is when the initiative becomes a vote. So do we want this proposed law? And then on the ballot, citizens can vote yes or no in a referendum. And if we have a corrupt politician, we can do a redo election, which is a recall. All of these things help to return government back to the people and away from potential corruption. And in the end, in the area of elections, we have primaries, where we have a whole slew of party candidates, but then the citizens get to pick which one they want to run for particular office. This is from the last presidential race, all the Republican nominees, and of course Mitt Romney was elected or nominated through the primary system to be the party's nominee. The 17th Amendment was passed to provide for the direct election by the people of U.S. senators. It used to be that state politicians would choose. Now that's returned to the people. The 19th Amendment will be associated with women's suffrage. Women wanted to be able to participate in cleaning up their cities, so they called for the right to vote. And then, of course, the secret ballot. This provides for some independent, secret voting, so you're not coerced into voting some way that the political boss wants you to vote or your employer wants you to vote. You truly are allowed to vote your mind. So these are all improvements to progress our nation in the right direction during this turn of the 20th century. There's 2 presidents that had progressive era policies that you need to understand. One is, of course, Teddy Roosevelt, better known as just TR. TR's progressive era reform policies are called the Square Deal. They mostly focused on trust busting, being a steward of the public, caretaker of the public's concerns, and conservation. In being a progressive era president, Teddy Roosevelt was much more hands-on, much more assertive than what we saw the Gilded Age presidents. And of course, he was popular even before this time as a Rough Rider from the Spanish-American War. So, pretty popular president. These are some things that we talked about related to Square Deal. His use of the Sherman Antitrust Act to bust up trust. Here he is taking on the giants of Wall Street, like Vanderbilt and Gould that we mentioned. A lot of times the press would pick up on sort of his physical nature. He was a great outdoorsman in battling big businesses like the railroads and the Bad Trust and Rockefeller. So a lot of times you'll see cartoons associated with his trust-busting reputation. In the area of steward of the public, he was horrified by the muckrakers and Sinclair's account of the meat packing industry. So looking after the best interest of the public, he'll help to sponsor and support the Meat Inspection Act. We also have the Pure Food and Drug Act to promote truthful product labeling to safeguard public consumption of products on the market. And then finally, of course, conservation we mentioned as part of the Square Deal, setting aside land that cannot be developed for big business, but instead preserved for the people. So you have the National Park Service promoted. And then finally, Woodrow Wilson. He's the other of the progressive era presidents that you need to know. He's born in Virginia, but he's kind of in a scholarly world through most of his adult life, serving as president of Princeton. And so he comes up with this really intellectual progressive era policy known as New Freedom, which essentially meant that we needed to do a better job of restoring a free market, competitive economy with checks on big business, provide for new opportunities, So this is the period when you have the Clayton Antitrust Act passed, which I mentioned, the FTC, and even the Federal Reserve, which of course was supposed to monitor the monetary supply, and we later talked about its failure during the Great Depression to do that. But these were all during the period of New Freedom, the Progressive Era policies. He's probably more famous, Woodrow Wilson, with his association with World War I. This was also the time when women pushed for their right to vote the most. They talk about their role in serving their country and wanting to be a part of the democratic process in the United States. And so their protest during World War I against Wilson for liberty and freedom and the same opportunities helped to give that last push for the 19th Amendment. So really kind of World War I, the 19th Amendment being passed, kind of wraps up the Progressive Era. And then of course we'll talk more about World War I later. So please review your slides on the Progressive Era. It's more of a domestic movement, the policies of Roosevelt's Square Deal and Wilson's New Freedom included with that.